Guys, today we'll make the case that in some scenarios Arlecchino can arguably be the best DPS in the game. By this, I mean that she can reach quite surprising levels of excellence, but there are some prerequisites to this that are important to understand. So let's check it out. There is no secret that I really like Arlecchino. Maybe I like her a bit too much. But in this video, I will analyze her at different levels of investment so I can give you the full picture of what she is. First of all, in a Constellation 0 no signature weapon scenario, her being one of the best DPS in the game is not extremely obvious. This is because Arlecchino is a very interesting experiment from Genshin. They made a unit that can't be healed by other characters, so is not very durable, but as a trade-off, her offense is very explosive. It's pretty much a kill or be killed situation with her, so you have to kill opponents before they deal too much damage to you. This means that there must be a lot of focus on executing the correct offensive rotations with her to end the fight as quickly as possible. Of course, this becomes much more relevant if your level of investment on Arlecchino is not the highest, and so even the smallest mistake can end up stretching the fight by 10 seconds or more, putting you in a much riskier situation. The bright side here is that even a Constellation 0 with no signature, Arlecchino is able to achieve pretty impressive results. And also, while the execution of her team rotations can vary in difficulty depending on the supports you're using, her windows themselves are pretty simple, as she's just a normal attack spam character. In my experience, this made teams with tricky setups much more bearable with her than they are with somebody like Huto, for example. Specifically, I'm talking about the Vape teams with Bennett and one between Sucrose and Kazuha. These compositions are typically called tricky because of the difficulty that comes from swirling the pyro element while still setting up your hydro support for the rotation. I wouldn't say they're hard to play, but they can definitely become annoying if you have to follow up that setup with a main DPS whose attacks can be mechanically hard to execute, like Huto. Not only that, but Huto being a single target oriented DPS makes these compositions very trial and error for her unless you're facing a boss. Meanwhile, Arlecchino pretty much goes on autopilot for her combos, and their attacks also have more range than Huto's, so she's definitely easier to play for this composition. Anyway, the correct rotation if you're playing Yelan, Kazuha and Bennett is to use Arlecchino's skill at the start, then go in with Yelan to use her burst, then use a quick normal attack to trigger the coordinated attacks and set up the hydro application, then go in with Bennett's burst to vaporize it, then another normal attack to set up the hydro application again, and after that you go in with Kazuha. At this point you need to use the hold elemental skill with Kazuha to swirl the hydro around the opponent and remove it from him. Thanks to the self-pyro infusion that's coming from Bennett's burst, you will also infuse pyro with his skill and swirl it right after. Then you go in with Yelan to use her elemental skill. It's very important to use it here because this way you can remove the pyro aura that Kazuha applied and set up the hydro application before Arlecchino comes in. After that you go in with Arlecchino, use the charge attack to claim the bond and proceed with your flawless Vape combo. With Xinqiao instead of Yelan, it's pretty much the same, with one difference that his hydro's ward surrounding him can apply additional hydro on the opponent. Basically, in this scenario, if you stay too close to the opponents, you will apply more hydro than you'd like, and this will ruin your pyro's worse. There is also a simpler version to this, the one where you avoid triggering Yelan and Xinqiao's coordinated attacks during the setups. This way, you want to swirl hydro, but you will still swirl pyro, which is the most important thing here, since you want to magnify Arlecchino's damage first and foremost. It also allows you to use Bennett's skill to apply more pyro on opponents, which means it's better for energy. On top of that, since Sucrose isn't Kazuha and can't swirl pyro and hydro in a single instance, this is much more viable for her. And overall, this is the team where Arlecchino has performed the best in the first few days she's been in the game. Let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. It's more dominant in single target because in those situations it's easier to control the auras on opponents, but even in AoE scenarios it has done better than other teams for Arlecchino. Part of the reason is due to the presence of pyro-resistant opponents in the first two chambers, like the Pyro Abyss Mage in Chamber 1, that make the playability of alternative compositions like Mono Pyro a bit rougher. I expect other teams to get a bit better in future Abysses, but as of right now, it's Vape all the way. And as I said earlier, with Vape, even a Constellation 0 no signature Arlecchino has been able to achieve very impressive results. Other than the total damage itself, there are two things that differentiate Arlecchino's offensive potential potential compared to most other carries. For one, her damage output is very front-loaded because her hits scale off the total bond of life she has, and as it gets lower, so does her damage. But right at the start, she will deal a lot of damage, and that's exactly where most of the Arlecchino runs are decided. That's the reason it's very important to use the Hydro character skill to set up the Hydro application and allow Arlecchino to vape the first hit, because the first hit is her strongest one. If you can optimize that first combo, then your rotation is going to be very smooth. And I will tell you, from a tactical standpoint, it's important for her to be so front-loaded damage-wise, because at the start, it's where the enemies are the most harmless. So if you can kill them before they start doing things, that's better for her survivability. And that's why, while Arlecchino is fine at low investment, she gets much better at high investment, because at that point she can deal so much damage in that first window that the enemies just get vaporized completely, quite literally. The other thing that is very convenient for her is that she can swap out and allow other characters to come in instead. This is especially great in a multi-wave scenario, where she can kill a wave and then swap out to a character like Kazuha to allow him to group the second wave, and then she can come back in and keep dealing damage. Now, of course, this is all situation specific, because it depends on where the enemies are placed to begin with, but as of right now, it's working to her advantage in a massive way, to the point that at low-cost speedrun level, Arlecchino is competing with Neuv in an AoE context, which is pretty absurd if you think about it. Meanwhile, in single-target situations, I think Arlecchino might actually be the best in the game, period. At Constellation 0, I will say she's competing with Hu Tao pretty evenly here, but with her constellations, that's where she gets her advantage, because her constellations are just much stronger than Hu Tao's. But honestly, overall, it's more that her ceiling is really high, and against bosses in general, it's easier to play in a risky way, because their patterns are easier to read compared to waves of opponents. Also, Sucrose is very competitive with Kazuha in this scenario, so in a single target scenario, because her buffing capabilities with Trailing Tails as a weapon are actually superior compared to Kazuha's for Arlecchino. This is unless you have Freedom Sworn on Kazuha, but yeah, it's good to know that Sucrose is a very competitive alternative in single target scenarios at least. Anyway, the flip side to all of this is that if you can't match this level of performance on Arlecchino and you have to play with shielders, for example, then her offensive ceiling really decreases by a lot. And rather than the damage itself, it's more about the quality of life you lose from an offensive standpoint, specifically if you lose Kazuha. It really puts a limit to her AoE potential, because while her range of attacks isn't small by any means, it's also not extremely large. So without Kazuha's grouping, she's going to suffer in multi-opponent scenarios. So basically, if you can't suck it up and play the more offensive versions of Arlecchino teams, then her ceiling definitely gets lower compared to somebody like Neuv. And that's where I feel like she's still definitely below him. Like Neuv, while it's definitely top tier for high level of play, it also is for casual play. Unlike Arlecchino, he's a very durable character thanks to his massive HP pool, his range of attacks is much larger than Arlecchino's, so it's much easier for him to handle AoE scenarios, and on top of that, he can use Zhongli on some of his best offensive teams. So basically, while Arlecchino needs to go butt naked in order to get the best results, Neuv can do that while still being all armored up and safe. But in my opinion, the trade-off is worth it for Arlecchino, because at her best she can match and even surpass Neuv. I think that's not extremely noticeable at low investment, but she might be the character that scales the best from investment in the whole game. For one, she's in the very unique position where characters on her team can hold the Edge of the End and Freedom Sworn, and she can take advantage of all the buffs those weapons provide fully. This is different from Hu Tao that doesn't benefit from attack as much. Arlecchino benefits a lot from attack, a lot from elemental mastery, and a lot from damage bonus. Her signature weapon is very strong, especially when it comes to the front load, because it increases the bond of life you get. Her constellations might be the best in the game, period, even stronger than Neuv. For example, her Constellation 1 increases her damage output dramatically while providing her full interruption resistance. Her Constellation 2 makes her deal nuke type damage at the start of her window, comparable to most elemental bursts, and when vaped, this is extremely significant. As a result, if you have all of this, she starts doing so much damage that you can ignore the defensive issues completely because she just destroys opponents, honestly. I know this might annoy people, her gaining so much from investment, but sadly it's the direction Hoyoverse is taking with new characters and there is nothing we can do about it. And even then, if you want to blame Arlecchino for gaining so much from investment, I assure you that most of the gameplay you see from Neuv on YouTube is at Constellation 1, Fiorina Constellation 1 or 2, and Neuv has his signature, so it's not like she's the only one to benefit from it. But having said this, I don't want you to lose track of the fact that I think that a cheap investment she can still compete with top tier DPS. Like, the offensive ceiling is still there, but it's just that her defensive issues gets more noticeable at that point. And it's worth reminding that at this point most people are still missing 2 talent levels on her normal attacks, and of course almost nobody has her signature set, so she's still missing like a 20% potential damage. Personally, I love her. I love the fact that they released a character that trades durability for offense, it just fits my playstyle. Anyway, I'm done for today. Bye bye.